Great. Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on exporting U.S. wood and lumber to South Africa. My name is Danielle Coco, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Director at SESTA. And today we are going to hear from Richard Zerba with Zircom International. They are SESTA's consultants in Africa, and Richard will speak first, and then we will hear from Tim McGuire. Tim is the acting senior attaché for agricultural affairs in the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria, South Africa. So he will then present as well, and we're excited to hear from you both. So I am going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Richard, to share your screen. And while you're doing that, I'll
Great.
just say, yeah, everybody's muted. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A and we'll get to those after the presentations.
Okay, Danielle, can you see that? Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to start off with a 20-minute introduction to Trade with Africa. But what I do want to start off with are a couple of things during this age of disruption. And we're going to talk about some of the really important changes that we've seen and how Africa fits in with all of the different disruptive things that we're looking at. And Africa actually comes out as a very interesting alternative to a lot of the markets that are presently not as accessible because of some of the disruptions that are happening. The first thing is that the tariff situation is bringing countries to America's door. A lot of countries are saying we don't really want to go through a disruption of our trade. So we're going to offer American products to come in duty free. This is something that is new. It's something that was created through the negotiation of the present administration and effectively how they're looking at tariffing the world and different markets in particular. But Africa right now is looking at not being uh, a competitor in terms of being able to wage a tariff war against the United States. But what they want to do is a lot of countries are going to be looking at maintaining a very good relationship with American trade balances and to bring American company um, products in probably at a duty-free rate. So we've seen several African countries offer this already. And if this happens across the board for a lot of African countries, it's going to mean that American exporters are going to come in duty-free into countries where they've never had duty-free access before, which is interesting. And it means that they will have the same level playing field, proximity to prices as the European Union companies, which are selling at zero based in terms of wood products into most of the African countries because there are comprehensive agreements between Europe and most of the other African markets. And also, then they'll be at a better position in terms of products from countries such as Brazil, Indonesia, even China, where tariffs are typically much higher. So this is something that is an America's benefit. The other thing is that the strategy of putting bringing a stability to a lot of the world's unstable locations, such as the Russia-Ukraine war, the issues in the Middle East, tensions with China. America is trying to solve all of these things at once, and that is creating a lot of disruption in itself. But in so saying that, it looks like they're getting traction in Europe. It looks like they're getting traction in the Middle East. China, it looks like that's a long-term issue in terms of the trade war. It's going to go on for quite a while. I saw that tariffs against China are up at 125% today. Who knows how long that's going to last, or whether there will be some kind of amelioration of that situation. But effectively, if everything can get stable, then the dollar goes on to a risk off kind of a situation. And right now, or most recently, it's been very high. The dollar has been trading since COVID at a relatively high amount to the world currencies. And what we're seeing now is that the expectation is that the world will be moving toward a less risky environment. And so we've seen the dollar actually today start approaching $1.12 to the euro. Now the dollar was trading at $1.05, $1.06, $1.07 for quite a while. So a 5, 6, 7% drop in the dollar is actually a good thing for companies as they try to approach different markets around the world at the same time that tariffs are falling. And the other thing is that we're likely to see the dollar go to $1.20 to the euro, $1.30 to the euro. I mean, several years ago it was traveling around $1.50, $1.60 to the euro. If we can see those rates again, that will make a difference more than the tariffs ever will. And that's actually part of the strategy that the current administration has. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two things play together, a lower dollar and more accessible um, tariff rates into different countries, particularly Africa, but around the world. And so, as you look for new markets and you're looking at disruptor situations like this, as small and medium-sized companies, you have the mobility and capability to move into other markets where you're not going to be affected by some of the trade wars that are going on, where people are going to be more open to your products and where you'll be able to get, you know, more sales for a longer period of time. Now, I'm going to tell you just very quickly about Africa. I've got another 15 minutes left, but I'm going to try to give you just a quick overview before Timothy gives you a focus on South Africa and the wood market there. So for SUSTA, we have a whole continent of staff ready to help you. A lot of our staff have worked for us for a long time, over a decade, and we do have one of the best global teams in trade advisory able to assist you. So know that you're in good hands wherever you are across Africa with our SUSTA in-market representative team. The next thing is that I'm just going to quickly tell you about some of the trends that we're all facing. All of these things, demographic trends in the world, cultural, geostrategic issues, which we just touched on, technological trends, climate shifts, artificial intelligence, everything's all happening at the same time. How do we get around this as small companies? One of the things that we're all dealing with is that the present administration and previous administrations too have looked at Fortress America, having a free trade agreement that is accessible to the United States and where the United States becomes stronger by joining Canada and Mexico and the Central American and Caribbean markets into a common market. And this is happening, and this is an important one where we're seeing a lot of trends. So this is one of the key elements of the Trump administration's tariff disruptions, and we're seeing movement very quickly across many of those fronts right now. The other thing is the war in Europe. The other thing is what's happening in the Middle East. This is very big because we're seeing Yemen being right now in the crosshairs of American military that's based out of the Diego Garcia region. So there's a lot of things that are happening there, but it looks like Iran is pulling out its support from the Houthis, who have essentially blockaded the Suez Canal. And if we can get the Suez Canal functioning at full pace again, that's going to do a lot for world stability and bring the dollar down as well. The next thing is things that are happening with China. China is not the big fearful monster that everybody thinks it is, and I think that it is really, really. If you look at the strategic outlook of China with its very quickly shrinking population, its aging demographics, its over leveraged finance, in a lot of, uh, particularly the building market. There's a lot of issues that it has internally that it is having difficulty with. And the 125% tariff, if that is persistent, that is really going to hurt China. And China, with a growth rate around zero or potentially in recession, is something that we haven't seen in decades. And this is something that is probably really scaring the Chinese strategic thinkers right now. And China is really something that is uh, going to be at issue. But also, if there can be an alleviation toward the United States of the pressure that China has been putting on the rest of the world, then this is going to be something that's interesting to watch. Then we've got the BRICS. There really is little chance that the BRICS pose a strategic threat to the United States. And even if they were able to create a BRICS dollar, as it were, they would have to do it based on Chinese interests, and the rest of the BRICS, they really don't get along as negotiating or trading partners, so I wouldn't be afraid of them. Then we're seeing, not just in the United States, but right across the world is becoming more polemical. And we see this in politics in Europe, where I'm from. I'm sitting here actually today in Romania. And if you've been following European politics, the court in Romania stopped the main opposition leader from participating in elections. And this is something that is really, really important because he didn't hold the same political beliefs as the more mainstream um, country. And we're seeing the same thing happening in France. We're seeing the same thing happening in Germany. It's right across the board. This is something that's happening even in the United Kingdom. So uh, it's not something that is germane only to the United States. It's going on globally in every English-speaking country in Europe, particularly, and everywhere. The internet has a lot to do with it. How we're forming friendships and cohesions across different connector uh, things. And then the U.S. dollar direction. We're seeing the dollar already at close to 112 today. So we're seeing a very steep increase, and it's likely that this is going to increase as the markets perceive um, a stabilizing effect in what's happening. So the markets typically look about 6 months in advance, but we have to understand that generally the news cycle is about 3 days. So we've got to kind of understand that there's a lot of interest in the market maybe moving in a certain way, and also things that are happening in the market. About 95% of market trades right now are based on algorithms that are put into computers, and that may also have general effects if there's any quick changes in the market. And so we're seeing an increased volatility, but in general, a drop in the dollar, which is going to help American wood exporters in a big, big way coming up. Just very quickly, comparative demographics. Yeah, China is shrinking, Europe is shrinking. You're probably aware of this. This is happening in a lot of places. In fact, in parts of Europe, you can buy a house for a very, very small amount because the populations in general are getting smaller, but they're also becoming more urban. And so smaller cities and smaller towns are actually shrinking, and some of them are vanishing, which is very interesting to see. And then we see that other trends that are going on in the world, according to the Pew Institute, religion is actually gaining, not in the United States where there's still a decrease in church attendance and things like that. But interestingly enough, and when you go out and do business, keep in mind that the trend toward religion is positive. Interestingly enough, the next thing is that when people do business, the world is becoming more relational. The world is becoming a little bit less transactional. Americans are known as the transactional society in terms of the business culture. And so you have got to be able to relate. And then if we look at altered, what has climate change got to do with things? Interesting. Keep that in mind. What is digital progression? Things are moving faster and faster. Artificial intelligence. Are you ready for that with your business? So, a lot of things that are coming up are creating disruption, and everything moves together, and everything is a counter disruption to the other disruptions, and everything is an exponential addition to the disruptions that are happening. And so, we're looking at an age where black swan events are going to be more regular. And a black swan event is something that nobody really planned for, nobody was ready for, nobody saw, and yet here it comes. So when you have a lot of disruption happening from a lot of different directions, you're more likely to get these black swan events. And I'd recommend, if you're interested in that terminology, then have a look at that book by Taleb. So Africa, very quickly, there's a population of 1.5 billion presently in the market in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and we're looking at another 1 billion people joining it by 2050, and then further by the end of the century, Africa will have over 40% of the world's total population. So it's an interesting time to be alive. We're seeing that most of the market is just shrinking in terms of demographics, but Africa is growing, and that's something important. Very quickly, if we look at the size of the United States relative to Africa, we could probably fit 3.5 or 4 continental USAs into Africa, and that's the reason why we need so many staff in different places. There are different countries that are as different as you can imagine. And so Africa has 55 countries in it, and we're well covered for that. But you can look at the size of the United States and try to fit yourself in there and just see how large Africa actually is. And our demographics, we have a very young demographic. The average age in Africa is 19 years old. So this is a lot less than the United States. The average age in Germany, for example, which is an aging population, is about 96. It's older in in Italy, and even if you look at even Mexico, the average age is edging toward 30 years old. So when you have older aged populations, you start people start thinking in different ways, but ingenuity, movement, new product lines, things, generational change really happens at the age around 20. And so we have a lot of positive energy in Africa because of that. And considering that we do have a large population that is growing, it's going to be young for a long time. Africa provides a very big differential for population growth. And here we can see where the population growth in the world is centered. It's all around Africa. Where you see the dark green, that's where populations are generally declining, growing less than the replacement rate. And in red, it's where it's growing much more than the replacement rate. So for exporters of wood products, this is important because you're going to see where the decades of future growth is going to be coming from, where people are going to be building homes, outfitting those offices, putting those wood products into use, and this is Africa. Generally, we're looking at growth across Africa, very good, very fast, and we're seeing that the average growth in Africa right now is about 4%, and it's different in each of the regions. But Southern Africa is the most static in its growth, and it's really because Southern Africa is the most sophisticated market, and the others are doing a bit of catch up. But it's also because of broken politics in South Africa. I'll admit that, and that's something that the country has to work out. But I think that they are working it out at in force right now, and this is something that has been being brought to a pivot by the current administration in the US and by other governments around the world. And South Africa is doing a bit of a deep cleansing in terms of where it is sitting diplomatically, where it is sitting in terms of the world economy, and making some good thoughts. But and then again, and this is not, I'll leave the wood talk to Timothy, but we have a a very fast growth in agricultural products into sub-Saharan Africa. And generally, U.S. agricultural inputs are growing very quickly in Africa right now. I don't have the most recent years on this chart, but they have been going up. And this is at a time when the dollar has been historically relatively high for a long period of time. We can see it here with the demographics that Africa has surpassed China and India already. We can see that by the uh, we can see that the replacement for the rest of the world has not been keeping up with the general ability for countries to maintain population levels, except for Africa, really. By the end of the century, Africa will be producing more than half of the world's total labor, interestingly enough. And this is something that is a really important thing. So by 2100, Africa will be making more new workers than the rest of the world combined. Let's see how that works out with AI. Let's see how the trends work together. But presently, this is what we're looking at. And we're also seeing that the population of Africa has surpassed China and India quite um, uh, but by quite a big margin. And interestingly enough, the numbers in China, not for India, but the numbers in China are likely very exaggerated. And so China probably has never got to 1.4 billion, but let's see where the current trends go. So all of these demographic numbers don't mean a thing unless you're growing in a per capita um, livelihood. And this is really what is happening in Africa right now. This is an important thing to understand that Africans are uh, growing in a per capita way, but it's really the growth in the middle class is one of the more important things to look at. And we see that the sub-Saharan middle class is growing very quickly relative to the rest of the world. And we're seeing that it is second only to the Asia Pacific in terms of the forecasted middle class growth. Very quickly, the I mentioned climate change, but if climate change is anything to shout about, Africa will get more rain, and if the world does warm up, and so we're seeing that presently with 60% of the world's available arable land, we're going to be seeing more agriculture coming out of Africa as it creates opportunities for food processing and agriculture for its own domestic um, population as well as export potential. So, just quickly, if you're coming into Africa, I'll tell you that almost everybody that you'll be meeting with, particularly in South Africa, will be speaking English either as a first or a well-spoken, fluent second language. And in the countries where you see in red, those are the countries that English is a national language. But I would also say that there's a movement to make English more prominent across all of the French speaking and Portuguese speaking countries, as well as the Arab speaking north. Even in Morocco, you'll find that most 25 and younger people are able to speak English to some level. And we've seen governments do things that are interesting. For example, Togo and Gabon just 2 years ago joined the Commonwealth of Nations, which is the club of countries that were in the former British Empire, and they had no history of being British colonies. And this is driven by the youth movement. They really want to be speaking English. Interestingly enough, 2 weeks ago, their discussions started with the United States potentially becoming an associate member to the Commonwealth. Now, the Commonwealth is not an old establishment, uh, kind of post empire organization. Its real focus is on being a nexus for business. And if you look at how it functions, it's interesting. And I think that this administration recognizes this. And so, as part of the British government and some of the other Commonwealth countries talking to the United States, this is something that has come up, and it's interesting. And English actually was just made the official language of the United States 3 weeks ago, I heard. So things are moving, and the African young people want to be part of an English speaking uh, business world, English speaking entertainment world, English speaking education world. And this is good for US wood exporters because you're going to have more markets that you can communicate with. And Africa is moving toward English as not only a leading language, but as the leading language. The African Continental Free Trade Area, Africa is moving toward one common market. So for your wood products, eventually there's going to be a common uh, requirement for wood products coming into the market. These protocols are probably 10 years away, so there's not going to be anything to tell you right now. But as we've seen that how Europe has gone, Africa will go there too. But as Europe took decades to get to being the European Union, so will Africa. This project only was signed up in May of 2021, and this is something that if you've got a lifetime of exporting ahead of you, you're going to be aware of, and it's going to become more of an important part of your life as you go. So we've got a very young population that is very strong in terms of its traditional uh, um, aspects, but very entrepreneurial. And so you're going to find that young people are often running businesses and being able to pick up things from global trends that their elders wouldn't be able to. This is something that we see um, in the United States, of course, but it's very interesting to see that although the progression towards a favorability for traits that the younger generation have are, are they're actually much bigger in Africa because there's so many more young people, and there's so many more young people making starting businesses. So if China had all of those factors, ability to communicate in English, access to global information, and an entrepreneurial culture amongst 300 million young middle class people, China would have surpassed the United States long ago in terms of its economic size. But China, I don't think right now is going to surpass the United States in our lifetimes, foreseeably. So, interestingly enough, Africa is in an interesting spot because it's at that developmental influx. So, we just looking at those trends. I just want to quickly tell you that Africa's got a good long-term trend line in front of it, and your ability to enter the market is looking better right now. And by the time this trade mission will come about, it's going to probably be even more interesting for American wood exporters into Africa. So I'm looking at we're looking at good things. I'll be able to provide you this thing if you want to look at something that will help you improve your business. Have a look at systematic inventive thinking. It's a methodological way of doing innovation. And there's a Harvard Business Review um, article that is might be helpful to you. So if you're looking at managing your company in an age of disruption, have a quick look at that as well as a few other things. Get to know a bit about the world, start reading about countries, but try to understand where those countries come from, and understand a bit about the market where you're going to. That will always help you keep you in good stead and give you a lot of talking points. If you're on this call and you're listening about Africa, you're already in one of those little circled areas where you're not in the mainstream. Being not in the mainstream is a good thing during the age of disruption. Those people in that cluster in the middle are fighting for market share in a shrinking pot. And so looking for new things in an exploratory way is going to really help you out. Keep in touch with what's happening digitally, be able to move and use AI as a creative tool, not as the end in itself, and you'll do well. So, looking forward to hearing what Timothy's got to say, and I'm going to stop sharing right now. Thanks everybody for listening in, and I hope that was very helpful. Okay, I'll pass it on to Timothy.
Okay, great. Let me share Timothy's presentation. Okay.
All right. All right. Yeah. While you're getting that up, I'll just introduce myself briefly. So I'm Timothy McGuire. As introduced, I'm acting as the senior agricultural attaché here at the Foreign Ag Service office in Pretoria. I'll just note that I'm here temporarily, we're a bit short-staffed at the moment, so I will unfortunately not be here. I'll be back in DC when you all are visiting South Africa, but we'll have other FAS staff in country who you may be able to interact with depending on your itinerary. All right, so you can go to the next slide. So just briefly, the USDA presence in Southern Africa. So as you can see, we have both an APHIS office and an FAS office here located in Pretoria. So that gives us the ability to work on a wide range of trade issues facing agricultural products. We also cover 11 countries throughout Southern Africa and have a satellite office in Luanda and Angola. We had a local staff person in Mozambique as well, who retired recently, and we've not been able to replace that position, but could happen in the future. But so within South Africa, we do have a fairly robust team for covering this entire area. So you can go to the next slide there. So just to talk a little bit about some of the statistics for South Africa overall. So it's the #2 largest buyer of agricultural products in Africa. It's actually a bit over 250 million in 2024, if you include related ag products like forestry products. And that's relatively small. That puts it way down the list in terms of export markets for U.S. agricultural products. But it has grown over time. It's been down a bit in recent years, but there's certainly plenty of potential both in South Africa and the region. The population is 64 million. It's and growing. As Richard sort of alluded to, both the population growth rate and the economic growth rate in South Africa are smaller than the surrounding area, but they're also starting from a higher place. It acts more like a middle income country in those respects. So most of the neighboring countries have population growth rates that are in the 4 to 5% range. But South Africa's population growth rate, 1.3%, doesn't sound like much, but it puts it in sort of the upper tier. I think they're 90th or so in terms of growth rate in the world, and the most of the countries in the entire world that have a growth rate for population that's above replacement level of 2.1, almost all of those countries are in Africa. So as Richard was sort of mentioning, there's the future of where population centers are going to be located. A lot of those are going to be in Africa. And then GDP, it underperforms relative to population, but it's still considered, solidly middle income country. The growth rate has been anemic, particularly this past year. Forecast is maybe a little bit higher than that, depending on who you ask, but for 25. But it's very much in flux at the moment. Growth has really been held back by a regulatory environment that is not well designed for investment in a number of areas. I'll talk about that briefly in the challenges slide. But it's a relatively robust economy overall, and there are plenty of sort of sectoral opportunities within it. Area doesn't really matter too much to you all, but I'll just note, GDP per capita relatively low and very highly stratified. So one thing you'll see immediately visiting South Africa is that there's a huge gap between the poorest segment of the society, middle income people, and then the sort of upper income people. The differences are dramatic, and most of the products that your exports will be targeting are sort of that middle income and up, people who can afford to buy sort of higher quality furniture and wood products and things like that. And that population has grown over time. The middle class has stagnated a bit. It is in part because of sort of a lack of social and economic opportunity. And that relates to the unemployment rate. So it's quite high and stubbornly high. 32% overall, 42% if you include people who have sort of given up on looking for work. And then the youth unemployment rate is almost 45%. It's extremely challenging for people to get jobs. So that certainly constrains economic growth. So the next slide. So some opportunities. As I mentioned, middle income, emerging market country. It's the second largest economy after Nigeria. A large percentage of the population is plugged into the banking sector. Mobile phone ownership is nearly 100%. Rapid urbanization, which is a big deal for furniture consumption in particular. I think it's around closing in on 70% now. It's forecast to grow to 80% by 2050. So, a very large percentage of the population is going to be living in urban clusters over the next few decades, and is already. So that has some, I think, very positive signs for certain types of consumption. And then, South Africa, you can think of it sort of as a hub for the region. So, having a fairly well-developed infrastructure, fairly well-developed economy, financial system, investment climate, things like that, even though there are plenty of challenges. But relative to the region, it does pretty well in all of those respects. It's got pretty good ports, pretty good roads, plenty of processing capacity for value-added products and things like that, and pretty well developed connections to the region. So I'll talk later about free trade areas. South Africa has pretty robust range of agreements in that regard for exports to the region. So products that are sort of refined and produced in South Africa are frequently exported to the region and also to elsewhere in the world. So that creates plenty of opportunities for products that are shipped into South Africa. So we can go. I think maybe I can control it myself. Yeah.
Great.
All right. So challenges facing U.S. exporters. So I've already alluded to a few of these things. Our products are many categories are priced higher, in particular relative to European products due to free trade agreements. I'll talk later about tariffs for wood products. That's not as big of a deal for the most part, except for veneer. Regulatory uncertainty, it's a big deal here. Better than some other parts of Africa for sure, but the government makes some puzzling decisions from time to time, and it's not always super transparent with those decisions. There are many technical requirements that can be a bit complicated to navigate, especially if you're new to the market. There are occasional issues with customs values over invoice pricing that can create issues for exports as well. Corruption's a big deal. South Africa, generally ranks fairly low on, or fairly high, depending on how you look at it, on corruption indexes. I think for people who are working with well-established importers, this is generally not as big of a deal, but certainly for investment in the country, it can create challenges. And then, structural challenges. I mentioned the low economic growth rate. A lot of that is impacted by electrical and water shortages. We call electrical shortages load shedding here. It's a frequent occurrence. Had been better than in recent past. There've been a sort of more recent spate of reoccurrence of that, but that certainly caps economic growth and productivity. There are skill shortages in a number of areas, although there is a fairly highly skilled workforce in some categories. There's some brain drain as well going to Europe and the United States. High unemployment I've mentioned, and then occasionally there'll be port congestion issues. It's gotten a bit better, like a lot of places in the world. There was a real major kind of conflicts of congestion challenges, logistical breakdowns during the COVID era that have improved somewhat, but there are some labor issues and things like that that affect that as well. So that comes up from time to time. Let's see, can we go to the next slide? There we go. So I'll just mention this briefly. So this just sort of shows the overall ag trade trends with South Africa. And you'll notice that that green line is actually showing a trade deficit. So we've gone from, being at near parity imports and exports with South Africa and about 10 years ago to having a pretty significant trade deficit in the ag sector with South Africa in this past year. Which is part of why you hear South Africa being talked about as a bad actor in some of these tariff discussions. Some of their non-tariff barriers, technical issues that I've mentioned are the other reason, as well as some political considerations. So they've seen a pretty big spike in exports to the United States of citrus, wine, macadamia nuts, dairy products, a pretty wide range of things. But I wouldn't read too much in the decline in U.S. exports. A lot of that has been due to challenges in our poultry sector, related to some tariff issues and disease issues. So there has been growth in a number of other sectors. It's just starting from a relatively low place. So just to sort of put that into context a little bit. You can go to the next slide. And then, so narrowing in a bit on the forestry industry specifically. So the timber area, and South Africa has a pretty well-developed timber industry that has existed for quite a long time, since the late 1800s. And the timber area peaked in the mid 90s, as you can see here. It's fallen about 50% since then, but still over 1 million hectares, with close to 20 million tons of timber produced annually. It's a fairly sophisticated sector. Private sector ownership is about 82%. You can see it's roughly half-half between hardwood and softwood, which is primarily South African pine, which is the dominant sort of commercial species, fast growing. I think it's actually not native to South Africa, but it's called South African pine. And then about 57% pulpwood, and then most of the rest is sawlog and a little bit of mining timber. So next slide. This is a bit of an older map, but the location of the forestry holdings is, I think, mostly unchanged. So it's roughly the two leading provinces are Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal. I'll show you on the next slide a little bit closely where those are. But you can sort of see that the timber production is largely clustered in the eastern part of the country, in subtropical highland areas for the most part. Mpumalanga province is about 40-ish% of all timber production, and then KwaZulu-Natal is about 40%, and then there's a small amount in Eastern Cape and Western Cape. So next slide. So just briefly, you can see here where Mpumalanga and the KwaZulu-Natal there are on the east, and the corresponding to that sort of subtropical highland climate zone. And then there's a little bit of forestry production in some of what's considered humid subtropical areas as well. So next slide. So trade, there's a fairly robust trade in wood and timber products, both in and out of South Africa, which makes part of what makes it an interesting market. So close to $400 million in imports and forest products in 2024 from the entire world. A lot of that was coming from Eswatini, which is landlocked and is surrounded by South Africa. But also from places like China, France, and the United States. Those are the next three largest sources. And then the types of wood products that they're importing varies quite a bit depending on the source. So you can see here, it's fairly low value stuff coming from Eswatini, and then wood paneling and for floors from China, casks and barrels from France. And then on the next slide, I'll talk about the US export categories. But then they're also an even larger exporter of forest products, and that goes all over the place. They're fairly diversified, and it's varied over the years. But in recent years, you have Japan and China in East Asia, but then Botswana and Namibia, neighboring countries, but quite a few other neighboring countries they send smaller volumes to. And then a small amount to the US. It's pretty far down the list for them, but it was $12 million the most recent year. And then in terms of what they're exporting, plenty of wood chips, sawn pine, rough pine, eucalyptus, and particle board. And I should mention that these are just sort of the what we consider forest products that they're exporting, but the sort of refined products like paper products and things like that, they are also a major category. It's just not captured in the data that I'm presenting here, in part because FAS doesn't cover a lot of those types of categories. But South Africa has made significant investments. I'll talk about that later on. In other countries, including the United States, they have some wood pulp manufacturing facilities now, I believe in Maine and Minnesota. So we can go to the next slide. So I guess this is a little bit hard to read, but in terms of the current situation for U.S. forest products that are exported into South Africa, you can see at the top there that oak is the biggest category and has also seen kind of the most growth, followed by veneer products, and then a few other hardwood categories have been a little bit steadier, but still fairly consistent over the years. So most of the current sort of U.S. exports fall into those categories. I'll mention in a bit later when I talk about pulpwood that there was a pretty big spike in 2022 in terms of U.S. exports in that category, but it's since fallen significantly lower. I don't know why, but if anyone else knows, that would be helpful. Our team can look into that more later on as well if anyone is curious. But so the next slide is so we've identified kind of two primary categories of opportunity. So I've already kind of mentioned that oak exports and sawn logs have been sort of that biggest category. So high quality hardwood it's not something that's really produced much in South Africa. As I mentioned, the vast majority of their commercial timber production is pine and eucalyptus. So, and they do have a pretty decent size furniture market and a growing market, about 2.5 billion in this 2024. I mentioned the high rate of urbanization that's driving some further growth in that area. So plenty of potential for a continued expansion in furniture. A lot of people are looking at, some innovative, high quality wood product type furniture, range of minimalist and other types of styles. So plenty of room there for investment. The furniture manufacturing sector, as you might expect, is largely clustered around some of the big population areas. Gauteng, which features Johannesburg that you'll be visiting, and Pretoria. Natal, or what we call KZN, or KZN, has Durban, where Richard is based, and then the Western Cape, where Cape Town is. So, those are the three kind of biggest urban clusters, and that's also where you see a lot of furniture manufacturing. And then, our team listed a few of examples of some of the furniture manufacturers locally who are using hardwood. I can't speak specifically to the types, whether any of them are using what types of imported lumber they might be using, but they're all using hardwood in some form in their furniture. And we can certainly look more into that in advance of your visit. So the next slide. So I mentioned wood pulp. So South Africa produces a lot of wood pulp. I mentioned earlier that's a good chunk of their commercial timber production currently. But they're exporting a lot of products that are produced from wood pulp. So and investing in other countries for the manufacture and of some of those products as well, including the United States. The company that's I don't even know how to pronounce this, SAPI, that's mentioned up top here, is the one that has invested most aggressively in the United States. And the sector is dominated by five manufacturers that you see listed there. Um, and they control most of the planted timber area as well. The wood and paper manufacturing sectors are concentrated more in line with where the timber production is happening, with the exception of Gauteng, which is where Johannesburg is. There's a fair amount of innovation in the sector. It's got a long history and there's a lot of investment there. So even though the sort of overall wood area is down, the manufacturing of some of these projects is still trending upwards. So as I mentioned, at least in 2022, they were importing quite a bit of U.S. pulpwood, leveled off since then quite significantly, but could be future opportunities there. So certainly worth looking into more. And then the next slide. Import regulations. So we produce a report called the Food and Agricultural Import Regulations, or FAIRS, which I'll mention briefly at the end, in our Global Agricultural Information Network system. So you can take a look at that for some more specifics on import regulations and procedures and things like that. But briefly, like most places, import permits and phyto certificates are required. I have the website link there for getting started at least. If you're working with an established importer, of course, they'll be very well versed in all of this already. And then on the tariff side of the equation, these are kind of our four in the most recent couple of years. Those are the four leading HS codes that we've been exporting under. And as you'll see, three of them are duty free. The one that's not is 10% for veneer sheets. Richard talked a little bit about the tariff situation. I'll just say that as of now, South Africa is not discussing any potential retaliation against the United States, either for the 10% baseline rate or for the sort of expanded 30% rate. That could change in the future, but at the moment, we're not anticipating any sort of additional tariff retaliation. All right, next slide. So I mentioned briefly, as a hub for the region, South Africa has quite a few trade agreements. In particular, the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, gives them duty-free access to most of the region. They have a few other agreements with the EU and Mercosur in particular. So that gives the sort of refined products that they're producing a pretty wide range of markets. They're pretty highly diversified in where they send products, so they're definitely not reliant on any particular export destination in most categories, which gives them a fair amount of resilience in the face of trade wars and things like that. Their access under the African Growth and Opportunity Act for exports to the United States is, of course, under threat on multiple levels. Being overridden by 10% tariffs, as well as the potential end of AGOA. It has to be reauthorized by Congress, and that may or may not happen. But for these other sort of markets around the world, they have very well established market access. And then next slide. So some of you may be familiar with FAS gain reports, but if you're not, there's the link, or you can just Google FAS gain. but we publish reports from our posts around the world on that in that system, including the FAIRS report on import regulations that I mentioned. We publish reports on most of the major agricultural commodities on a very regular basis. For some more specialty commodities, including forestry products, it's less frequent, but I've posted here the two kind of most recent reports that we've published for South Africa in the timber area. So one, only about 5 years ago in 2020, we posted a fairly comprehensive overview of the sector, which is, I think, still pretty relevant. They did mention in that report that pulpwood imports could increase in the coming years, and as I've noted, they did in 2022. So they had some prescience there. And then back in 2014, there was an update that had some additional details. So a couple of things you can look at in addition to some of our overall reporting on South Africa. All right. And then here's our contact information for our office. We have a dedicated website, USDA Southern Africa. We also have a sort of overall mailbox, agpretoria@usda.gov. If you send a message to that mailbox, one of us will respond. There's our phone number as well, and then we're physically located at the U.S. Embassy here in Pretoria. So thank you, everyone, and I'll turn it back to Danielle if you have any questions, Q&A. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Tim. That was, and Richard, a great look at the market in general and how lumber and wood is doing. Let me see, I have not seen any questions coming in, but we will give that a minute. So SESTA is hosting a trade mission to South Africa, Cape Town, and Johannesburg in July. So later today, I'll send a follow-up email with more information on the trade mission. And Richard, I don't know if you want to add anything about the event.
Yeah, so our team has a very good grasp on this sector. We understand and know who the key importer distributors are. We've had success stories in the sector from states inside SESTA. So we do have, a really good team who can help you out with appointments when you get into the market. And keep in mind that South Africa serves as a distribution hub for a range of countries in the neighborhood. So it's likely that when you do come, you always have to ask potential counterparts, how many countries do you cover? And they might respond and tell you, yeah, we distribute into 5 or 6 or 7 different countries. And so understand that that's some collateral benefit that you would have as well. And understand too that relationships are very key to this market. There was one year where we noted that American imports had started to fall, and we noticed it again the next year. And I did a straw poll and I called 15 of the companies that did import distribution that we'd been in touch with over the years. And the word came back to us that, well, the Americans, they don't visit as often as some of the other people. We're getting a lot of visits from Brazil and Indonesia, and particularly, they're picking up some of the hardwood markets, and they're changing the varieties simply because they're here every 6 months. And, as I indicated in my presentation, being relational is really important. And that means getting on airplanes wherever you go in the world. And being a successful exporter means participating in the market, meeting people, not just having introductory meetings, but having follow-up meetings. And it might not have to be the key owner of the business that you have, but maybe a junior person there to, start developing relationships with the buyers. So it's important to understand the key dynamic there. It's often not economical. The relationships are very important. And as Timothy said, Timothy had a really great presentation with a lot of key information. um, there is a market there, and you've got to be able to parse it. So yeah, South Africa does have an average income, but it's very diverse in terms of the buyer potential. And so maybe 7 or 10% of the population in South Africa lives better or as well as people in your states, and another 10 or 20% are kind of up and coming, and other 10 or 20% there are lower middle class. And then you've got a lot of people who are structurally very low income, and it's unlikely that they'll be joining the income in their uh, living years. And so South Africa really, when you look at it, it might have over 60 million people, but you're probably looking at a population relatively, if you're coming from a state of 7 or 8 million people, that would be more of a relative market size of the population that you would be selling into as a U.S. exporter. So and keep in mind for the entirety of Africa that there is always a 2 or 3% of the very wealthy that can afford your products. So even going into a place, and you might say all the statistics for Nigeria are absolutely abysmal, but you look at it and you go, well, there's 220 million people there, and if 2% of them are in the very upper income levels of purchasing behavior, then that's going to be 5 or 6 million people. And so you can look at markets like that and start to understand where your buyers might be. There is a good differentiation for North American hardwoods. I've really, I've got to say that. And as Timothy's slide indicated with the oak, that really is a strong seller because it's got a good differentiation to it. Maples are also nice. The flooring market is good. He mentioned we mentioned and talked about the furniture market. So there's things where people are moving toward natural products, and you're part of that. Uh, the world is starting to get afraid of plastics, and so why laminate your house in plastics now, with them in every floor of your house? There's reasons to use natural wood, and so I'm looking forward to your responses later. And thank you. Those are my closing comments. And maybe Timothy, if you've got something to say, really, uh, I'm glad to be working with you as well.
No additional comments. I saw in the chat there was a question
Mhm.
um, about white oak staves for casks. Yeah, and I know that I don't know if Richard knows about that category specifically. I know that there's
Mhm.
been significant growth in barrel exports to South Africa from the United States over the last 4 years. Significant growth. I think it was up to like 1.5 million in value last year. For staves specifically, I'm not sure,
Mhm.
but barrels are also a big market from France in particular to South Africa. And of
Yeah.
course, the wine industry here is large. But
Mhm.
Yeah. And there's some interesting niche markets. South Africa has a very big barbecue culture. In South Africa, we call it braaiing. And you can go and buy imported hardwoods that will flavor the meat in a certain way. And so you buy these in wood chip bags. So there's it's a small market, but an interesting one. And there are also wood chips that go into the wine sector. They're put into the barrels as they're aged. So, I mean, there's quite an interesting diversification of how the different woods are used. And if you need any further information, we can help you out with that.
Um, and another question about the importer and distributor list for the trade mission, if they could be shared in advance. This company wants to do basic due diligence to determine if it's a good event for them. Um, I don't, Richard might be able to elaborate a little more. Typically with our trade missions, it's one of those chicken and egg scenarios where the importers are not recruited until we have the companies register, and then we try to match make accordingly. But when it comes to something like this, that's not just, a lot of our events are food and beverage, which is could allow for a wide variety, but something like this that's much more industry specific. I'm not sure at which point we are identifying the buyers. Yeah, Richard, do you have?
Well, let's put it this way. The companies that are coming on the trade mission, they're our priority, and we want to help them make sales. The ones that aren't as dedicated, that really, just want a little bit of information or a lot of information. They want all the same information, but aren't willing to make the visit. That I don't want to say that you're not focused on what you need to do, but our purpose is that we really want to be there for the companies that are making their putting their footprint into the market, and they are competing with the same companies that want all that same service for, I don't want to say for free, but at the cost of not coming. So that's one thing. I mean, I will not hesitate to tell you that in South Africa there's 15 really good importer, distributor, wholesalers that we can work with. There's 15 of them that are really good. Then there's another list of another 15 or so that are up and coming, or want to move into the market. Those are the companies that we're going to find, and it's going to depend on the varieties that you want to sell. It might depend on a couple of one-off products that you've got that are available at the time that somebody else has a need for. And so going into all that deep information, following up with those companies is really what we do on your behalf. So, you know, supplying a list of unqualified leads is, you can probably find them online and without any free of charge. I mean, that's part of the but the real thing that we do is qualify your product lines with the companies that we work with. We do all the calling. I'll tell you that persistence is the key thing that really helps, because often to make an appointment with a buyer in the wood community, it can take not just one call. It will take maybe a minimum of 5 telephone calls, and often up to maybe 10 or 12 points of contact, including emails and calls. So making an appointment is not the easiest thing, but that's why we're there. And we're there to help filter out who's interested in what products you're offering, and that sort of thing. So just to give you some idea, we do know who's who in the zoo, and we're really, really focused on helping companies to make sales, and those who are dedicated, and we recognize that, get the best help. So I think maybe Danielle has a couple comments about that as well, and how SESTA likes to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really our main
Yeah.
focus, is focusing in on helping companies make sales. And if your company isn't a fit, and we see that you're interested, then we will be honest and tell you. We're not here to drag you across the world to spend your time and resources on something that will be not productive for you. We really want you to come in with a good probability that you'll be creating a good generational um, contact, someone who will last decades as a business partner. That's our end game here.
Yeah. Yep. And I could only just echo what Richard is saying, that yes, I mean, it really is, our companies register, then consultants like Richard do that due diligence for you to make sure that they're bringing buyers to the table that are a good fit for your company. Um, And to Richard's point, we have definitely gone back to companies and said, like, hey, we know you registered and paid. We're going to refund you because this isn't a good fit for your company. We exist for you to succeed, and we certainly don't want you doing an event that we cannot guarantee success, but that where there isn't good matchmaking potential. Um, and, we were speaking at an event yesterday when we had an exporter on a panel, one of our participants, and he said that in the past he had gone, I think it was to Mexico without SESTA and was, looking for importers and just how long and hard that was to do on his own. Essentially knocking on doors, trying to figure out who was importing his types of products. And speaking to the benefit of these kinds of trade events where we have people in country doing that due diligence, people who know the trade, and that's really the benefit of these events. Keeping an eye on the clock, and I know we're a little bit over time, but we have a couple more questions that we'd like to get to. One is, what is the shipping transit time from to South Africa from the U.S. East Coast?
I think it's like 1 to 2
that
months.
typically, yeah. Typically it's going to depend on the port and how long it will take you to truck to the port. There's a lot going out of Houston, and so if you're closer to the port of Houston, that's a good one. Others are Port of Philadelphia. There's good. Have a look, and yeah, I'd say definitely 1 to 2 months. It depends if it's also going through Antwerp or through another European port. Can take a little bit longer than a month, but we typically look at around 5 weeks. Also depends on whether you're shipping it to Johannesburg through Walfish Bay. You can save almost a week by doing that. Walfish Bay is a port in Namibia, and then they'll put it onto a truck there. Keep in mind that port fees in Durban can be quite expensive, and you might be able to get it even faster through Walfish Bay than if you were to ship it directly to Durban and then have it trucked to Johannesburg. Durban also has a lot of wait times for the ships, so taking it through a minor port that is less used and with less congestion might be interesting. So that's something that we like to keep a handle on, and it is important in the wood trade, we understand. So tell us, when you're doing your discussions with us later, tell us which state you're from, which ports you prefer, who your logistics friends are. Maybe we can help you out with some direct answers.
Okay. Are there any large wood products trade shows in South Africa that would be a good venue for U.S. companies to connect with importers after the trade mission this summer?
There's one good show that is in tandem with a much larger show called, I believe it's Buildex, and so yes, there is a focus exhibition, sub exhibition to that show. I'll have to look at the dates of that. It's an annual show that is focused on the building industry, but it includes wood materials as well. So it doesn't really touch on furniture, or it probably does touch a bit on flooring and interiors, but you wouldn't get everybody in the trade, but you get a good slice of them. That show would be included in everybody's information packet as well.
Yeah, I think it's June 18th to 20th, it looks like.
Thanks for digging that up, Timothy. Appreciate it.
Great. Oh, somebody had a hand up, but I think they put their hand down. Okay. Well, I know we're over time. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Tim and Richard, for staying on and answering all the questions, and to everybody who joined us today. Sounds like an interesting market, a good event. If you're interested in exploring this further, that seems like a good next step would be to travel to the market and explore it yourself with SESTA and our support network in country. So thank you all. Like I said, I'll be following up with an email, including the copy of today's webinar and the presentation. So you can also, we can follow up and keep the conversation going. But yes, thank you all.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.